and gentlemen, welcome to the future. My name is Zach Gardner, the Chief Architect at Keyhole Software. And a few months ago, I decided that enough was enough. I needed to learn more about this thing that everyone was talking about. The kids call it generative AI. So I scoured the four corners of the World Wide Web. I dug through the trenches, dug through the murk, dug through the milieu. And thankfully, for you all, I found enough people that I think I have a pretty good grasp of it, and I want to share the lessons that I have learned with you all. Today on the program, I have Doug Thompson, the Chief Education Architect at Tanium. Doug, thank you so much for coming on. And before we begin, the views and opinions expressed in this program are the views and opinions of the participants. Do not reflect their employer. Do not reflect any trade organizations they're affiliated with. No loyalty cards they have at any regional grocery store. We're just two guys. We're just having some fun. Just chatting a little bit. So, to get us started off with Doug, for those that don't know you, can you give us a little bit of your background? What was your career path? Do you remember the very first computer that you had? Let's get started off there.
A lot, Zach, for having me. Happy to talk. Obviously, you looked in sort of the dusty cobweb corner to find me, but I'm always happy to come out and chat. I am first of all, I like to call myself. If you look on any of the social, I'm the Doug Thompson because first of all, it's two reasons. One, anybody can be a Doug Thompson. There's some comedian, there's some politicians and stuff on that, but the Doug Thompson is aspirational. Always have to work at it to keep doing it. So it keeps me humble and keeps me going after it. But I didn't get here with any strategic plan. It's like I'm a nerd. I love putting stuff together. I got my first job out of college. I was a copier repairman, and because that's the jobs that were available at the time. And sooner or later, I started working for the manufacturer, and computers came along. The company I worked for, Panasonic, I was a field rep. I was a field tech, and we started networking things. So we got out of simply the copier business into networking, and I was like, well, this is pretty cool. So one of my peers got a computer at the time. It was like 286. So we're going way back in the day, and he got one and coaxed them together to network, and then he challenged me. So the gauntlet was thrown. So I got one, and so it was like an arms race of who could nerd out the most. This was back in Windows 3.1, where you had to load DOS first to get Windows on it. So it wasn't exactly fun, but I was curious about it. And then I got into sort of building my own PCs. I don't think I bought a production PC until probably started working at Microsoft, which was later. But I built my own because I was just a nerd. I remember, hey, when hard drives got below like $1 a megabyte, it was like, whoa, this is really cool. You laugh at that now. But I just was curious, and that might sort of taken my career. So again, I worked at Panasonic. We formed this sort of networking lab, and I was the instructor, and I sort of ran all that stuff. I started doing contract work as a trainer, Microsoft trainer, for an organization. Because again, I like to teach, I like to talk, I like to share information about as much as I like technology, and so I did that on the side. And an opportunity came up with Microsoft to do at the time they called the Roadshow. And this was for the System Builder channel. That's back when every mom and pop, you had it on the corner, would build it. And there was thousands of people across the US. So I went in and, I never want to look back and say, hey, I turned down an opportunity to go talk to them about that. I'm always open to talk to people. And anyway, I got the gig, went around. A few months later, they said, hey, look, we got a job here for you. An interview. Cool. Okay. It was more of a lateral move, but it's like, hey, it's Microsoft. I can't turn that down. And so I stayed there. I was at Microsoft for 20 years. I had various roles, which is like 3 lifetimes for most people in there. And I had different roles in there. I started out in the OEM division, pre-installing Windows, working with the Dells and the HPs and all that. We got around to working with tablet PCs back when the hardware was really not ready for it. That was 8 pounds and had a 40-minute battery life, and you had to use a pen. It wasn't a great experience. But I was working with them to that. I went through Pocket PC phase, then the phone and everything else. So I got to do some pretty cool things along those lines. And then I got into the education team as a technology strategist, which is basically a system engineer. Again, I'm a nerd. I like playing with things, but more importantly, I like solving business problems because technology, if, for technology's sake, is sort of painful. But technology to solve a problem, now that's really cool. That's where the magic happens. And so I was, doing some of that, and then Microsoft at the time was coming up with, hey, we're coming up with AI. This was way before Chat GPT and stuff at the time. And we're doing, it was really not much more than machine learning, where you were making some educated decisions with it. But really, it was sort of go around and talk to customers about here's sort of what we're thinking about that right now. Again, Chat GPT and stuff was sort of not a figment of somebody's imagination, I think, at the time. But basically, more than anything else, just coming on from the ethical standpoint, just because we can do something, should we do it? So you learn a little bit from the philosophical standpoint, because you can do a lot of stuff with technology, but is it really good for civilization? Is it really good for what goes on? And that gets the generative AI gets into sort of that discussion about, are we displacing workers and stuff later? I mean, but that comes on. So anyway, I was doing around. I was really happy doing that. I saw a job at Tanium that came up in my LinkedIn feed, and I said, well, that sounds pretty good. It was a little bit closer to home. I had the best job at Microsoft, in my opinion. And I'd been doing that for a while. So let's go try something new at a smaller company. So that came open. And because of my education experience, they said, hey, look, you can help us sort of education strategy. I'm still a pre-sales engineer here at heart. Again, my best jobs are in front of people where I get to talk to them and learn something and share knowledge. And, that's why, when you asked me to be on the webcast here, I said, yeah, cool. I'm all in for that. I like to talk to people. So that's how I got where I'm at. Today. It's a long story, but I have a long life. So, and I didn't have hair anywhere along the career path. So I didn't lose it because of the job.
Trust me, Doug, I have my fair share of gray hairs. The editing and post production, that cleans it all up. And a good moisturizer, I would say, also helps retain my boyish looks. So, enough about the external. Let's talk about the internal a little bit. Let's talk about the digital, the cyber, if you will. I'm curious, we talked a little bit about this before the recording. How are you using generative AI in both your personal life as well as your professional life? Give the audience a little bit of insight on that.
It also gets back to some of what the strategy was at Microsoft. It is not really, it's meant to make humans be better. Ideally, and when you're using this, it's not necessarily meant to replace anybody, but how can you free up humans to do things that only humans are uniquely skilled to do or equipped to do? And I use it for, if I'm crafting say I just did a talk last week at a conference, and I used it to sort of create a first draft. I say, here's some ideas and stuff that I have, create me an outline for a 40-minute talk that covers X, Y, Z. And it's a good first draft for me. Right now, I've gotten pretty good where I don't have to spend putting a timeout to get all the prompts right. I'm getting a little bit better with that, but I used it a lot to do that, to give me, because I have writer's block. I can't write more than like a sentence, because I'm trying to write and edit at the same time, which is just can't do. If you try to do that, you get nowhere fast. And so I use it for that primarily. I'll use it for some research, but I always go back and check the math, if you will. I always go back and, okay, is this really true? And then I tried to use it from the image generation stuff. I'm having mixed luck with that. I'm not still, I get that. What are they showing me here? I got to work on my prompts on that. But I use it as an assistant to help me take care of these things that used to take a lot of time, that took a lot of energy, that I couldn't really focus on where I could add value, and then do that. I don't do it to take place of me. I have to put it in my voice. So even if I try to say do humorous or these other things, it's still not in my voice. So I spend my time polishing what used to take me. I'd be doing this right up to the time the talk started, but it cut my time probably to do a new talk in about half, because I get that heavy lifting, or maybe even more, but it makes the end product better because it sort of helped me do that. So I'm using it for that as the primary way that I'm using that, again, which is, I think, a great workflow. And if you think about it from a company perspective, I talk to people a lot, and they're worried about losing their job. And some companies are looking at, they want to cut cost, and that's not really the way to use this. That's not the best thing. and they also don't necessarily roll it out what I would call correctly. They sort of put it in a little small container and they don't share it with everybody. So the small group that has access to it seems to have a leg up on everybody else, especially if you're trying to do performance reviews and things like that. Well, you're comparing me against somebody who has access to tools I don't have access to. So it's a cultural shift that's going to have to be overcome to sort of make this broadly adopted and useful. That, hey, we need to democratize the AI piece of this. We need to make it where if it's available to one, it's available to everybody. But you got to put rules in place, right? You don't want your data leaking out and doing these other things. But it needs to be thought of as a companion. How do we help upskill other people? Enough video training, enough like this. Here's a tool. Here's how you use it effectively. Here's the guidelines. Here's the guide rails. Here's everything else. Then let's see what that creative brain can come up with.
Your comments got me thinking about some conversations that I've had with a variety of people recently, mostly around how much of the FTE market is going to be displaced from tools like Sora. Actually, on the Sora front, I recall seeing an article about Tyler Perry. He was planning a expansion of his movie set production in Atlanta. It was going to be north of, I think, 700 million, if I remember right. And it was just, I mean, his point was very valid. Even if this tool, which looks, pretty cool right now, even if it takes a year or two or three, it's going to get to the point where he can be just as creative with it and doesn't have to have a physical presence. He can do everything through a virtual tool. And it's very mind-blowing, somewhat disconcerting, I would almost say. There's been several shifts that you and I have had in our respective careers. When we went from 32 to 64-bit, for instance, it was cool. It doubled our capacity, but it wasn't so existential. It wasn't so monumental because we recalled what it was like to go from 8 to 16, from 16 to 32. We at least had a valid frame of reference when we went from CISC to RISC for all the uber nerds out there that love their hardware. But for human beings having no foundation upon which to consider this technology, no real frame of reference, it can feel frightening. I think that's a very valid, very natural, very understandable response that humans can have. I'm curious, in your conversations with people on this particular topic, have you encountered two extremes? One extreme being, yeah, give me the Neuralink, get it in my brain as soon as possible. And the other extreme being, you shall not take this keyboard from my hands, the sort of the Charlton Heston, with my cold dead hands around this keyboard.
You hit upon a couple things. I do think it speeds up the time frame in which a skill becomes irrelevant, if you will, or less important. Nobody makes ice boxes anymore when the refrigerator came out. In fact, that was a large part of Microsoft stuff, but they have so few OEMs now compared to what they did. Those skill sets are gone, and you automate production. You automate these other things, which if it's a very repetitive type thing, or then that's fine. It's almost like it's not a low skill, but it's a skill that doesn't really, it can be replaced. So I always encourage people think, okay, what can you do to make yourself where you can't be replaced by that? Like Amazon, it's easy to click and go do whatever, right? I'm as guilty as the next person to do that. But if there are areas in industries where it's that personal touch that you have, that you can show the differentiated value that you bring that you can't get from a piece of silicone and some code. Those I use today weren't even, nobody even thought of them back when I started working. But this amount of skills that no longer are used or absorbed in something else is probably 90% of them I've had over a lifetime have become obsolete. So it is part of our responsibility as a worker to, how do we help prevent that? How do we help make ourselves less disposable, if you want to turn it that way? What industries can I get in to go do these things? Again, as I said, I think, I've heard it, lawyers are sort of at risk, and that's a pretty cut and dried business, but I still think if it came down to some things, I would want one that a human could come in and interject some other things. Again, there's so many facts that, well, although right now there was a study where somebody invented a case ChatGPT invented a case to this other thing. The guy filed as sort of a reference point, got smacked around because it didn't exist. It was, it's like, you got to do your homework. You can't constantly be looking how you can upgrade your skill set. And how can you use ChatGPT or generative AI or something like that to go do that? How can you spend less time with the dull stuff that's repeatable that, again, first draft? Get out of that, get in the creative mode, get something, because right now they are somewhat creative, but you still come out with pictures with people with 17 fingers on a hand and these other things. It's just it is limited with what it can do, but it does learn and grow fast, and we get to do
Mhm.
that. Now, and the other thing about, canceling those people, are we gonna have to settle for mediocrity that simply AI comes up and creates a movie? For me, that's not very exciting because there's no emotion. The things that make a movie really good, other than action and stuff, right? Yeah. Um, all the artificial graphics and stuff like that. I mean, that's important visual, but the dialogue and the sort of the part of it, a movie that really tends to move most people is there's an emotional attachment. There's actors, there's other things that it's really hard to, even if they're computer generated, it's really, to me, it doesn't, it needs some seasoning. Yeah, I'm close to Southeast Louisiana, and we always have the Cajuns like a little seasoning with food. So I don't want to be left flat. So I mean, it's a do we settle for that? I mean, guess that's a concern of mine too. Do we sit
Mhm.
back and become the people on Wally that are floating around these big fat blobs that can't do anything because everything's catered for? We don't have to move. To me, that's scarier than anything else.
Oh, for sure. Got to have a little bit of seasoning in life. Make sure to sprinkle a little bit of that Old Bay seasoning. I'm talking to a native person of Louisiana, so I hope that reference was well met. Your comments got me thinking about several revolutions that we have had in our respective industry. When we started out, assembly language, like that was how we communicated with the machines. But over time, that became obsolete when higher order languages like C came out. And then that got replaced by C, where we were able to more accurately describe what we wanted to the machines using a vocabulary and vernacular and methodology that fits more closely with how human beings conceptualize of the world. We think about relationships, we think about classes, we think about properties. We don't think in terms of pointers and memory allocation, although I'm sure there's some extremely nerdy people that are currently listening to this that are running some mallocs right there. Every revolution that we've had in our field, of course, has been met with a fair amount of friction, a fair amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But inevitably, progress and innovation have won because all of these revolutions have allowed us to become more productive. They have allowed us to ship more features. They have allowed the suits that pay for us to be able to sit behind an IDE for 40 hours a week to afford our mortgages. They've been able to make more money because we have been able to become more effective. Time is truly the only finite resource in this entire universe. Carbon, oxygen, you just got to go a solar system or so over to get some more. But time is the one thing that is moving in one direction. And once that second is gone, once that clock ticks, you're never getting it back. So, how do we more effectively use our time? A lot of programmers that I have heard, you actually mentioned this earlier, if you are able to use a tool to make you spend half as much time creating a presentation, guess what? That gives you the ability to create twice as many presentations. It's a no-brainer. I don't know why more people aren't talking about this. And this is something that I'm demoing for the first time in production, so to speak. This is something that I was thinking about when I was driving my kids around this weekend. What if the way that we should be thinking of these tools is not how many programmers is it going to displace? Maybe the more effective way that we should be conceptualizing, should be thinking, should have contextual reference to something like GitHub Copilot. how much more productive will it make me? How many more features will I be able to ship to production? How many more stories can I complete per sprint? Because the biggest ding that I hear on every single software project that I've ever been on, it takes too much time. We always go over our estimates. Things always go over budget. And if you could give someone like a professional in another field, Usain Bolt or Max Verstappen, for the Formula One fans out there, if you could give them something that they could just like spray on themselves and they would become 2% more effective, I mean, that stuff would fly off the shelves. The programmers that do not embrace these tools, that do not learn how to use them and learn how to use them effectively, just want to copy and paste the code. But the programmers that say enough is enough, human beings are the only ones that should ever program, the ones that are not embracing this innovation and respecting it for the things that it does well and doesn't do well, those are the programmers, honestly, that should be worried. Because the rest of us, guess what? We're going to be shipping features twice as fast.
I think you're exactly. I remember coding in hex in an assembly language I started back in those days. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's the extra value I can add. It's the extra stuff I can add because I don't have the stuff that used to take. I call like so. Behind me, I got a couple posters from Ironman races I did. So that was one day. That was one day in time. Granted, it was 15 hours one and change and 14 hours and change the other time, but that's what the poster represents. But it doesn't show the 6 months of training that I did to get there. Think of that as sort of your baseline coding and stuff like that. Right. None of that shows up until you get there. The race day is this, here's the deliverable. Now, what if I could just simply build upon that? Right. What if I could build those, like you said, here's the baseline of stuff. Now I can add new things and things that I were unbelievable before because you couldn't do it because there wasn't something in there. I mean, the low code stuff that's out now, power apps and things like that, where I simply have an idea and I can fit the pieces together, the Lego set, to build something that will do an acceptable job of doing it. That's fine. But again, for your coders, like don't think of it as a threat. Think of it as what's this stuff that I hate doing, which most people would hate that boilerplate stuff. They have their own library of copy and paste and more time doing the really cool stuff. Again, we got in here to do cool stuff. We didn't get in here to write boilerplate or what have you.
Mm-hmm. At least I didn't.
I didn't either. I mean, I make the joke at my time. So Tanium, we're doing endpoint management protection. One of the things we do, patching in the asset. Who got into IT because they wanted to patch? I'm waiting for somebody to raise their hand. Nobody's raised their hand on that one.
And trust me, I didn't get into the business to be able to patch things either. So Doug, thank you so much for the time. If anyone wants to check you out, make sure to check out your LinkedIn page. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a blast. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you in the future.